Hello and welcome to another edition of Exploring A Course in Miracles. I'm Emily Bennington Perry with the Circle of Atonement, and I'm here with Circle founder Robert Perry. And today we are covering part 2 of our 2-part series on A Course in Miracles and politics. In part 1, we discussed the presidential candidacy of Marianne Williamson. And today we're discussing the teachings of A Course in Miracles and what they can bring to our collective political vision. If you are wondering what A Course in Miracles has to do with politics, I should say here at the beginning that here at the Circle, we don't view spirituality as the means to withdraw from the world. We view spirituality as the means to heal the world. And that is a really important distinction to make for a discussion like this, because while it is true that spiritual practice is centered around our interior experience with God, the Course is very clear that we are meant to use that experience of God and with God to go out and be his hands and feet in a world that is really hurting. And yet, it's funny because no matter how many times we say it, that spirituality is not meant to be the means by which we withdraw from the world, but the means by which we heal it. Inevitably, we hear from very earnest Course students who don't agree. These are students who maintain the position that the Course has nothing to do with the world and certainly nothing to do with politics, given what an ego fest it is. And so, Robert, it just feels like a good place to begin is with the question, does A Course in Miracles have anything to do with politics? But before we get into that, I just feel like we need to be crystal clear that we are not talking about a theocracy with this discussion. This isn't a new form of religious nationalism. We're not suggesting that anyone literally be governed by the teachings of the Course. That is absolutely not what this is about. This is about taking the wisdom of love, forgiveness, and divine equality and infusing it into our political narrative where that wisdom can really make a difference. Because really, at the end of the day, politics is about how we get along. It's about how we forge a society where we can live together. And the whole history of the Course is about that. The Course started in response to a better way in which we can get along, in which we can cooperate instead of compete. And so if politics is about how we get along, and the Course has so much to offer about how to get along, why wouldn't we want to have this discussion, right?
Yeah, I mean, right there, you could say is the germ of a political vision. The Course was all about, it was a response to a request, you could say, for how people could get along, how they could live in harmony and cooperate rather than compete. That's kind of the essence of it all.
Yeah, but just to get into the bits and pieces of it, just backing up and talking about what politics is. I know you spent some time today fishing out a definition. So do you want to let us know what that is?
Yeah, that was hard. I went to a dictionary online.
It is good to do some table setting, so we're all on the same page about what we're talking about.
Yeah, because the word politics, you kind of have a feel for what it means, but it's good to just nail down what it actually means. So the best definition I found was this: the activities associated with the governance of a country or area, especially the debate between parties having power. And then that sent me to look up the word governance, which obviously we know what governance means, but the definition that I found was the act or process of overseeing the control and direction of something. So, politics in its essence is just about how you govern a country or area. But I think that second part in the first definition that I read, the part about debate between parties having power, I think that's where the negative sense of the word comes. When you say, well, they're just playing politics, You're talking about they're playing a game of jostling for power. And I think that's a lot of what we don't like in politics. We see how much of it is just about power. But, it doesn't have to be that, and it shouldn't be that. Politicians, I think we all know, should be public servants. The fact that they tend to put power before service is more of a statement about human nature than it's a statement about politics per se. We all, I think, watch that and think if only they were all pure public servants. And the potential, of course, is there.
Politics at the end of the day is really about how we can live together. At its best, government is the structure that we put in place to be a guardrail for our society. And proper government is meant to serve that function. It's meant to keep us moving in the same direction, and it's meant to ensure that no one falls off the cliff. And so we talk a lot about values here in this podcast. We did this whole series on the traits of the advanced teachers of God. And I think values serve that same purpose. So if government is the guardrail of society, then values are meant to be the guardrail of us as individuals. And so in both cases, if the guardrail breaks, then the whole thing breaks. People are always like, government is so corrupt. But the reason why the government is corrupt is because there are corrupt people in government. And
we elect them.
It's a breakdown in those values. And so we have to start there. And so this is where spirituality comes in, because spirituality and spiritual principles really shore up those values. Spiritual principles at their best take us to a place that we can't get to on our own. At least that's what spiritual principles are supposed to do at their best.
Yeah.
So if it's a breakdown of government, then we really have ourselves to blame, because it's a breakdown of the individual, because that's all a government is a collection of individuals. So somewhere along the way, we've got it wrong. And, it's so easy to look out there and say, oh, the government, there's just something wrong with it. It's so corrupt. Politics are terrible. It's all about personal power and wealth and status. But that's just a reflection of who we are. That's a reflection of how our values have broken down.
It's true. I mean, why do we elect people who we know are not there as public servants? It's not just that politics is dirty. Human nature, we're
is dirty.
Human nature is pretty dirty. We're a pretty primitive species, a pretty primitive world, and we're trying to pull ourselves up out of the mud, and there's just mud on everyone.
Right. So, but again, that's where spirituality is meant to infuse into politics. That's where it could help politics, I guess, is a better way to put it.
Yeah.
So just getting back to this relationship between the course and politics, in our last episode, we talked about the presidential candidacy of Marianne Williamson and how there are just different attitudes out there in relation to her candidacy. And so those varying attitudes are really just a signal of our ambivalence to the course and politics, or the course's potential influence in the political sphere, isn't it?
Yeah, it's true. And I think there are very different attitudes out there. And it's helped for me to see the reception of the earlier episode we did on Marianne's candidacy, because I had gone on to a very popular discussion board on Facebook about the course. And someone brought up Marianne's candidacy there. There was a lot of discussion, but the general thrust of it was very little enthusiasm for her candidacy. And for a lot of people, it felt like they were having to call upon course principles just to hike themselves up to a place where they could be accepting
of neutrality.
Yeah, that they could accept that she might make that choice to enter, the race. However, when we released that episode on this podcast, which was 9 days ago at the time of the recording, we've been quite surprised at how well it's been received. It's become very quickly one of our most popular episodes ever. At this point, there's 100% likes. The comments are generally favorable towards Marianne's candidacy. They assume that there's a valid relationship between the course and politics. So there are these kind of different views out there. And I think this is not discussed a lot in course circles, at least in my experience. But I think if it were discussed, we'd find that there was quite a range of views.
But how much of that do you think is just Marianne Williamson's popularity? Because I think our second most popular episode is the one where we had her talking about, should we seek to change the world? So it's popular, but is that really a statement on the course community's engagement with her candidacy, or is it a statement on just her general popularity?
And people maybe looking on YouTube for videos about her candidacy. I don't know. That's a good point. I don't know. But it was nice to see. It was nice to see just a lot of people who were clearly in the comment section, who were clearly course students, and who were in support of this connection between the course and politics, even in support of her candidacy. So one thing I did was I went and did what a lot of people are doing right now is I queried the AI chat GPT. I plugged in, does A Course in Miracles have anything to do with politics? And the answer, I've been asking questions of chat GPT about the course and getting some really terrible answers. But this one wasn't too bad. It said, so my question was, does A Course in Miracles have anything to do with politics? And the answer is, while ACIM does not have a direct connection to politics, its teachings on forgiveness and love can certainly be applied in the political sphere. Nicely said. The principles of ACIM emphasize that true change comes from within, and that our perceptions and beliefs shape the world we see. By applying the principles of forgiveness and love to our political views and interactions, we can create a more peaceful and compassionate society. I liked that. And to me, it draws out the obviousness of it, right? Politics has to do with all of us living together in a single society. Forgiveness and love are interpersonal, right? The course clearly has to do with us living in relationship with others. Politics has to do with us living in relationships as a whole society. So I don't think the connection is that obscure.
Well, I like that first sentence from the chat GPT. While the course doesn't have a direct connection to politics, its teachings on forgiveness and love can certainly be applied to the political sphere. That's all we've been saying this whole time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Again, this is not a discussion about creating a new theocracy. This isn't about course nationalism. This is just a discussion about the ideas of spiritual ideals. And if spirituality is supposed to be the highest wisdom that we have, then once again, why wouldn't we want to infuse it into our politics? Because the ideas that are currently dominating our political narrative have got us here. And we're in a pretty bad place, as we all know. And so I love Marianne Williamson herself's answer to this. And, she always says that those of us in the higher consciousness community should be the last to opt out of political discussions, because it's higher consciousness where you learn what changes a human heart. And if you know what changes a human heart, then you know how to change the world. And to me, that is just the bottom line for all of this. If you know how to change a human heart, you know how to change the world. And nothing changes a human heart like love. And the highest form of love is forgiveness. And the Course's central teaching is forgiveness. And so if we can apply forgiveness to our political sphere, then we will be applying the highest of spiritual wisdom. And it might get us to a place of healing versus a place of division, which is where we live each and every day.
Yeah. And I think in terms of the course's relationship with politics, I was affected quite a bit by the discussion we had in that last episode about the four freedoms of Franklin Roosevelt, because with the four freedoms, he was really trying to reshape American society. If he had lived longer, who knows what might have happened. He was trying to reshape the world with a big vision. And
Hmm.
the course's comments about the freedoms are pretty glowing. They say that if he had just not gone to war on their basis, they would have been true freedom. So the vision in itself, the course is approving of, and that you could say then that the course is for reshaping the world based on a big humanitarian vision. And that, of course, is what Marianne's trying to do as well.
Right. And I think, again, that speaks to the heart of what we're doing here. Rather than saying, well, I'm going to use my spirituality to withdraw from the world, why aren't we saying, I'm going to use my spirituality to create a new vision for the world, one that can bring us together and heal? So I think we should be holding a spiritual vision for the world and unapologetically walking towards it, stepping into it. Because
Yeah.
all of this roundabout discussion about whether we're supposed to be engaged in this world it doesn't make sense to me, because we so clearly experience ourselves in this world, and we're so clearly surrounded by people who are hurting, and we're so clearly hurting ourselves. So
Yeah.
if we just get out of that discussion and roll up our sleeves and start working towards healing, then we might actually make progress towards a
Right.
bigger vision.
So
So
those listeners who don't see the course as engaging the world need to change their mind right now on the spot and do all that we say.
I know Robert has said, repeatedly before going into this discussion, like, Emily, this is like your hotbed area. This is your pedestal. Get off your pedestal.
Your
Don't step
soapbox.
on it. And here I am on it. But
Yeah. But that
anyway,
just let me
it is
just
what it is.
interject that it's a big issue in course circles, this relationship with the world. And that episode that we did do with Marianne grew out of discussions we had with her about, like, how come so many students feel this way. So it bears being addressed, of course.
Yeah, and I'm going to keep talking about it until we stop getting letters about how the course
Yeah.
has nothing to do with changing the world. And so just get ready.
Okay. So if
So
if people want you to be quiet, they just need to, like, agree with you.
Oh God, that sounds terrible. Okay, anyway, moving on. So let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that those who are listening, that we have convinced them that the course does have something to bring to a larger political vision for our world. And as you and I were talking about what the course offers, there are a million different ideas that we could pull
Mhm.
and say this could contribute to political vision, and this one could too. But we came up with four. These are very, very broad stroke course teachings, but what I'd like to do is to read the four teachings that we pulled, and then we'll go into them one by one. So the first is, the course teaches that there is divine worth in each person. The course would steer us towards a society that is not about surface things like materialism and power, but about happiness and connection. The course is anti-war, so it's leading us to a place of nonviolence. And the course is teaching us to treat others with love, regardless of who they appear to be. And this means forgiving wrongdoers, and it also means having compassion for the winners. So let's start with the first one, which is the divine worth of each person. And as we say so often around here, the course is not just concerned with granting each of us equal human rights. The course goes well beyond that, to granting all of us equal divine rights. So, in other words, our true spiritual nature remains as God created us, regardless of what our bodies do. And when it comes to politics, though, politics is about governing what these bodies do. And so let's talk about how these two ideas fit together.
Yeah, well, I feel like the first thing to address is why seeing divine worth in people is so foundational, because I think it is. Basically, how you treat someone and how you feel towards someone is all about how much worth or value, same idea, you see them as having. If they're worthless, you can discard them. If they're worthless, you can see them suffer and do nothing. Maybe even you celebrate. But on the other hand, if they have immense worth, you treat them differently. You treat them with care, with respect, with consideration, with love. In fact, I think what the word we call love is just the word we use to describe the emotional response you have to someone you perceive as having worth, as having value. If you really think someone has value, you will have that emotional response we call love. So love is all about perception of worth in another person. And what the Course is saying is that everyone, without exception, has more than just, the worth that we would accord them in our society. They have divine worth. In fact, the Course says the Holy Spirit, quote, always teaches you the inestimable worth of every son of God. And the emphasis there is on every. So every son of God, regardless of their race, creed, color, regardless of their character, regardless of their place on the social hierarchy, regardless of what they've done, whether they've done bad things or good things, no matter what, the Course is saying that everyone has inestimable divine worth. And that, to me, is the basis for a new world.
That is absolutely the basis for a new world. I've always been struck by this teaching about equality in the Course. I can't stop doing Sunday sermons about it. And honestly, I can't stop thinking about it, because if we're talking about creating a new world, then from a Course perspective, that new world comes from how we treat one another.
Mm-hmm.
And how we treat one another in the Course comes from how we see one another.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we see one another with true equality, then we will treat each other differently. And the reason why we're treating each other so poorly is because we're not seeing each other in this way. And so I've always been struck by Miracle Principle 47, where it talks about how the lesson that we're here to learn is the true equality of the sonship. And so when you think,
I guess that's implied.
Like what is the lesson that we're here to, you think that there's a ton of different lessons that we could come here to learn, but they're all kind of converging on this idea of the true equality of the sonship. Now, do you want to argue with me that Miracle Principle 47 isn't saying that? Because go
I
ahead,
think it doesn't say it.
It doesn't say it outright, but it says,
it's kind of implied.
It says, in the longitudinal or horizontal plane, the true equality of all the members of the sonship appears to involve almost endless time. But we know that time is only an artifact introduced as a learning aid. The sudden shift from horizontal to vertical perception, which the miracle entails, introduces an interval from which the doer and the receiver both emerge much further along in time than they would have otherwise been. Now, I know that probably feels like way too wordy, and what the heck is Emily talking about there? But the idea of this horizontal plane of time where we are judging people by what they've done in the past and what they might do to us in the future, it causes us to be afraid, be fearful, be separate, But if we can switch our view of people from what they've done in the past to what they might do in the future, that horizontal plane, to the vertical plane where we only see them as God created them, because that's all that's true about them, then we would treat them differently
Sure.
and
Yeah.
we would have a different world. So I think, again, I know that's wordy, Miracle Principle 47, but that idea of seeing people not from the past or the future, but as God sees them is really important and can take us further
Yeah.
spiritually.
I think that, I mean, we have to acknowledge that the idea all men are created equal is at the foundations of the United States. And so what is the Course saying differently about this? And I think maybe a couple things come to my mind. One is that the Course is saying that our equality exists at a very high level. In other words, each person has limitless worth in the eyes of God, limitless worth in reality. Like we tend to think, yeah, everyone has worth down here on earth and we all have equal rights. But so the equality the Course is talking about is not so much on this level of, yeah, we all have a certain amount of worth. It's raising that up and saying our equality exists on a level where each person has limitless worth. The other thing I would say about how that is different than the ideals the country already has is that I feel like we have a concept of equal rights,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't really amount to equal worth. Like the person on death row does not have much worth in the eyes of society. The person who is at the bottom of the ladder and is on the edge of survival does not have much worth in the eyes of society. Whereas people who are powerful, who are famous, who are ultra wealthy, they are treated as having more worth in the eyes of society. So I feel like if we could adopt the Course's view, we would see everyone as being at the very top of the scale, having the same worth, for instance, as Jesus. And that changes all the rules.
It goes to what you're saying about valuing everyone. We do value those who produce in our society. You got this window where you're working, and then if you're before that window or after that window, if you're retired, for example, there's less worth placed on you in terms of our society. And these things aren't right. We aren't looking at each other as we should be. And so this kind of perception can heal all of that because it eradicates all of those distinctions and differences in the ways in which we see each other. Are you worth it? Are you producing? Are you voting? Are you doing whatever it is that I want you to do? So once we just take all of that off the table, then we might have that new world.
Yeah. And if you think about it, I mean, now that we're talking about it, the fact is we have how many populations in our society that are saying, hey, we are not given much worth in the society. We are not given the same rights as,
And they're not wrong.
They're not wrong. And the list is really long. I mean, I think it started, a long, long time ago, perhaps with women. And it's just the list of populations that are not considered equal has just grown. I do think, though, that it really changed the picture when you set our equality as existing on a very, very high level. Each person has untold, priceless divine value. So we are equal. We have equal value on an extremely high level, not just on the level of this world. I think that changes the calculus.
It does. And I really do. I know we need to move on, but I really do appreciate this conversation around the difference between equal rights and divine rights. Equal rights are just the starting point. We should all have equal rights, period. but we have further to go. We can go beyond that to divine rights, and that's what the Course is asking us to do. And that's just a beautiful way to look at the world.
Yeah, I
And
know. I know
feel
we're
it.
belaboring this, but I mean, imagine the worth we give to Jesus. You know, if you're a Christian, even if you're not a Christian, this world accords so much worth to. If he were to show up and everyone knew it was Jesus, then imagine the incredible value that would be that he'd be treated with. Well, what if everyone has that value?
I feel like we need to move on.
Yeah.
This is why I get tripped up on equality and just want to talk about it nonstop, because there is so much to say about it. And I think so much of the teachings of the Course hinge on this one idea. And so we need to get it right. And we're very far from that. But anyway, moving on to the second teaching that the Course has to offer that would vastly improve our political vision is its teaching on specialness. And I mentioned before that the Course is trying to steer us away from seeking our happiness in the pursuit of things like materialism, wealth, and status, and so on. And it's pointing us towards seeking our happiness through joining and connection. So let's talk about that idea.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge topic. And I would break apart specialness from materialism, both of which the Course is very concerned about. The Course has a veritable mountain of teachings about how we think having things in the world will do it for us, having money, having possessions, whatever. And then, so that's its own whole issue. And then, in addition to that, while we're seeking the things and the money and the status and the fame, while we're seeking those things, we are in this competition to have more of those things. And that kind of gets us toward the realm of specialness, where, I'm trying to be better than everyone else. And when we're all trying to be better than each other, life is one big competition, because I can only be above if somebody else is below. So we're all kind of, subtly, secretly, or not so secretly trying to be above, which means putting others below. And it just makes the world one huge battleground. The Course says that competition essentially is the root of all evil. And we're all doing it, but for the most part, we can't show it. Like, think of sibling rivalry, right? You don't want to make it obvious that you're trying to best your own brother or sister. So we have a world of covert competition, which leads to overt conflict. So yeah, I think materialism is a huge issue, and specialness and all the forms it takes is another huge issue. And ideally, government an enlightened government would gently try to steer us away from all that, because there's a huge amount of power in government to structure the society. Go ahead.
I'm just laughing at the idea that government would try and steer us away from seeking our happiness in power, status, and wealth, when government is full of power, status, and wealth.
Yeah.
So how could an environment that's all about power, status, and wealth, with any credibility, look out at the horizon of society and say, you should not seek these things that we've been seeking that got us here?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're talking here, if we're talking about bringing Course principles into politics, we're talking about a very long arc. We're talking about incremental change. And ultimately, we're going to have to, I think, change human nature. We're going to have to make life on Earth be about elevating, ennobling character, moving character from egocentrism to love. And only when we start doing that, I think in centuries to come, will we start seeing something like enlightened government.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear. I've been in and around government on various positions in my life for a while, mostly in my past before I got to the circle. And I've met a lot of people who have gone into government for real noble reasons and true political ideals, the best of political ideals. But I think, you're right. This is going to be a transformation of the human if we want a transformation of society. And as it stands, as humans, we think that we will find our happiness in material things and specialness. We will find our happiness in things of status, like who's more powerful, who's more wealthy, who's more influential, etc., which is another way of saying who's more special. And those are all egoic goals. And when you're dealing with egoic goals, then you're dealing with the nature of the ego is to be on top through attack. And so if you're dealing with ego goals, then you're dealing in the realm of competition through attack. And inherent in that is inequality. That's the natural result of egoic goals, is inequality. And that's what we have all around us. And what we're seeing is it's unsustainable. We can't go on like this. And so if we want a new way of doing things, we need a new way of seeing things. And that's what the course can bring to this conversation is again a new way of seeing each other that results in a new way of behaving that results in real healing.
Yeah. And I just want to say that I think that even though we're probably a long, long way from enlightened forms of government, just because humanity itself is not enlightened, you can see how government could move things more towards the kind of society we're talking about, where it's not about the surface things. It's about the things that really matter. As an analogy, we've been seeing in the news recently that the Biden administration is going to try to have, rules set that will basically ensure that 2/3 of new cars sold in the US by 2032 are all electric. And they're just trying to change the rules with the EPA regarding pollution. Now, that's what government does, things like that. So changing some rules will change the whole landscape when it comes to the cars we buy and the pollution that they put out. Well, imagine government changing other kinds of things. So, imagine government paying attention to real human need. So, for instance, we've all been hearing that there's an epidemic of loneliness, especially during the pandemic. And I found something where last year, some academic researchers called for a national public health effort to prevent loneliness. I don't see record of anything happening on that level, but they're calling for it because it's needed and because government could take it on. Government could address this epidemic of loneliness. Like, why not? An enlightened government would do that.
Well, there are many programs of government that do have enlightened
Elements
feeling,
of that,
or higher ideals for the good of all. The one that came to my mind was the school lunch program. How many children were not learning because they were hungry? And the government stepped in and said, okay, we'll pay for your breakfast and for your lunch so that you have a full stomach and you're free to learn. And that was part of the tragedy of the COVID pandemic, was that so many children who were dependent upon those school lunches went hungry. Now, that's a government program that was instituted to be for the good of society. And, just back to Marianne's campaign, I'm with her in the idea that it's government's job to make sure that everyone has a fair shake through a quality education and through healthcare, so that if you get sick, you're not automatically bankrupt, and good quality roads to get you to work, et cetera, and clean air and clean water and pure food. So if we have those things, then the government needs to get out of the way and let the ingenuity of the individual take over from there, so that we can do what we're here to do, have dreams and achieve them, etc. And so that, to me, is the role of government, to just make sure everyone has a fair shake and then get out of the way. And so
I'm not sure it's quite as simple as that.
Okay, what are you saying that's different?
I think that if we as a society would come together and say, these are our values, you know, we we're all about caring for each other. We're all about love for everyone unconditionally. We're all about, you know, people going through a journey in life where education is lifelong, where personal and spiritual development are at the heart of life, where relationships are at the heart. Like I could
That's not
see,
government, that's utopia.
well, why not? I could see government um, if those are the values we collectively agree on, I could see government saying, okay, you know, part of how those things happen is government sets up conditions, just like setting up conditions so that the cars we sell are less polluting. I could see government setting up conditions that would be supportive of those values. I think that in the end, I mean, if you look at the course, it's counting on millions of people being miracle workers, in everyday life. It's counting on that to save the world. Okay, but government can help put in place the conditions that support millions of people devoting their lives to expressions of love. Or government can make it so those people are just spending all day treading water to survive, in which case they're
Mhm.
not, a fraction of them will devote their lives to being miracle workers. So I feel like, yeah, government just can't step in and say, we're saving the world. Saving the world in the core sense is a matter of change within people, change between people. And yet government can put in place the conditions that make that easier. I'm struck with, you read so much about climate change, and you read that just a little bit of change in a temperature in a certain region means that a species can't live, at that elevation anymore, for instance. Life changes at that elevation with little tiny changes in temperature. So that's another, I think, a metaphor for government. If government can change the temperature so that conditions are more favorable for a world full of miracle workers, then
Mhm.
that blurs the line, I think, between those two, regions you were talking about.
You know what tiny little change I would absolutely love to see? And it wouldn't take much. I mentioned that I used to work in government. I wasn't like in government, but I worked at a marketing firm and worked on a lot of political campaigns. And this language of being a fighter was always big. Every candidate wanted to be seen as a fighter. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you're going into government with your dukes up, if you're going into government saying to your constituents, I'm going to fight for you from the minute I get there, on the eighth day, God created a fighter, with DeSantis' commercial. And
Yeah.
it's like, we don't need more fighting. Like that is the problem. Like,
All
so
the fighting.
can we just stop with the language about fighting and say, on the eighth day, God really needed somebody who was a healer. And on the eighth day, God needed somebody who knew how to love. And maybe that would change things. And so just that one little, if you want to turn the temperature up 1 degree, like stop with the fighting, which leads me to
Wait.
I
One
know
last before you
we
move
got
on.
12 minutes.
Okay. I did see that Marianne had language in something she said was, we will not fight for blah, blah, blah. I forget what it was, like, let's say a better world, but we will stand for.
Yeah, because that's almost like the four freedoms where it's like you don't fight against, you side with.
Right.
And that's language that Marianne has throughout her campaign, siding with the whatever it is. I think she talks about it in relation to the suffragettes
Hmm.
and the abolitionists and whatnot.
Hmm.
They
I hadn't
were, they
noticed
were,
that. It's
yeah,
interesting.
she uses that language a lot. Anyway,
Okay.
the third idea from the course that would greatly enhance our political vision is the idea that the course is anti-war. So it's leading us to a society of nonviolence and the absence of aggression, the complete absence of aggression. And so obviously many spiritual teachings are anti-war. I don't know how you could call anything a spiritual teaching, a true spiritual teaching, if it were pro-war. So what do you think is unique about the Course's approach to being anti-war and anti-violence?
Good question. I don't really know, as I'm not, I'm not educated in the different sort of pacifist or anti-war teachings. One thing that I know, when we did our two podcasts some time ago on the Course's perspective on war, something that struck me is the Course wasn't saying war is evil, right? War is this horrible, evil thing. What it was saying is war is senseless. War is pointless. It's not, rather than evil, it's simply insane. And then it pictures war. It talks about, toys of war. It has imagery that makes it sound kind of crazy and just wrongheaded. And I don't know how unique that is, but I like that perspective. It just, like, it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. We see that it doesn't work. I mean, I guess the only reason why you fight war is because on some level it does work. I'm glad that the Nazis lost World War II. Okay, I think I'm not alone in that view. So on some level, you can beat people into submission, and that seems to quote unquote work. But unless you change on the level of your ideology, then all of those demons are just going to rise again. So yes, the North won the Civil War, but guess what? All the demons of hatred and racism, they didn't go away. They were just dormant. They were never really dormant. They just didn't have any true political expression until recently.
They
And
didn't
so,
have an army, which they still don't
yeah.
have, but the war is still being fought, in a sense, as I think we all know.
And so you can win on the level of just sheer dominance, but unless you win on the level of ideology, it's just going to keep coming back and coming back, as we're seeing. And so that's where, again, you get into this idea of we need to change human hearts, because if you're a happy human heart, if you have a heart that's full of love, you're not even thinking about aggression. You're trying to do the best thing for the good of all. And the only reason why we have so much war in this world is because we have so much hate in the human heart.
Yeah, it's true.
Okay, so moving on to the last teaching, and this, it's a shame that we don't have a whole lot of time, because this last one I'm not entirely sure we're all ready for. But the Course is also leading us to a place where we are demonstrating love towards everyone, regardless of their actions, and even regardless of their character. And so what the Course is leading us to is a place of forgiving the wrongdoer and having compassion for the winners. So let's talk about that, because that's a tough pill for people to swallow.
Yeah, I mean, this to me is the natural extension of that first principle we talked about, where everyone has inestimable divine worth, regardless of anything, including their actions and their character. And so to me, that means we should have a society where it's all about demonstrating love to everyone. And that means to the wrongdoers, to the people who we would consider truly criminal, bad people. But it also means something that I've gotten from, especially from the Gospels, where Jesus's teachings back in the Gospels often pictured people who were what we would call society's winners, but they didn't really win. And I think that's a fact of life. The winners don't really win. I don't watch the show Succession just because I tried it out and I didn't find it entertaining.
I was watching it with my kids, and you watched one episode and said it was irredeemable because there was no character on there that had any values or heart.
Yeah, it didn't hold my interest, but obviously everyone's talking about it. And there's an interesting article I came across online, I think last year, and it's a therapist, and his clients are the super rich. And his attitude, having worked up close with a number of clients that are ultra wealthy, is that succession gets it kind of right. He talks about billionaires lacking a sense of purpose, struggling with shame, guilt, and fear, feeling isolated and trapped inside a very small bubble. But at the very end, what he says is that, part of the whole point of succession is to give us feelings of pleasure watching the wealthy struggle and be miserable. But his last line was, but for someone who has worked with them, I know that their challenges are real and profound. So to me, we can look in on all that with what's called Schadenfreude, where we're like feeling pleasure at their misfortune. We're celebrating their misery, or we can have compassion because they haven't won, right? Life is not about the toys. Life is about happiness and connection and purpose. And so while we are, forgiving the wrongdoer and caring for the downtrodden and welcoming and accepting the other and including the other, why aren't we having compassion for the quote unquote winners? Isn't that part of a loving society as well? Doesn't mean we have to, let the rules be structured such that they, get more and more and more power, but it means we relate to them as human beings, or as the Course would say, as sons of God, who have just as much worth as us, just as much worth as Jesus. And if they're miserable, that matters. We don't take pleasure in it. We respond with compassion and love.
Think of like the worst political figure who like got in office, like won the election, and forgiving them too. That's a really, really hard thing for people to do, because these are the very people who seem to be causing so much suffering in the world.
Yeah, but having looked at like the progressive causes and such for a long time and supported them, you see so much of the desire for a better, more loving, more tolerant world gets funneled into a lot of anger and even hate towards those who are seen as to blame for the current world, right? And how can you get to that world of love and tolerance through anger and hate? We can change the rules while loving our brothers and sisters.
There you go. It's the Gandhi quote, the ends inherent in the means. You can't have a loving outcome through a means of hate. And that's what I think our current society on the left doesn't really realize. Like, you can't hate people into being tolerant. You can't hate people into loving everyone and creating a world that is equal and just for everyone. Like, that strategy just doesn't work. And so I think this idea of, let's not only forgive those who are the wrongdoers, you forgive the officers who killed Tyree Nichols as much as you express sympathy to his grieving mother.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know we're just about out of time here, but all of this reminds me, there's a passage that I haven't heard people talk about in the Course, but it's gained more importance in my mind over time. It's in chapter 30 in the text, section 6. And it seems to be talking about this future world. And in this future world, no one cares anymore about what the Course calls idols, the material things. Okay. Those things aren't valued. Instead, everyone is united in this one goal. And the one goal is staying on earth until we have made forgiveness perfect in ourselves. So we're all as a world joined in this one goal of learning perfect forgiveness, and we don't care about the material things anymore. Just imagine, and that picture, I think, touches on all the 4 points that we were talking about. Just imagine a world like that. It would be a paradise.
I know you have to go. And I have a question for you related to the last section, though. It feels like the wrongdoers are the winners, right? So in my mind, like in the way that question is positioned, it's like we have to forgive those who are the wrongdoers, but we also have to forgive the winners. And the way that it looks to us now is that there's actually no clear line between those two. The wrongdoers appear to be the winners.
Well,
So,
I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think a lot of the wrongdoers are just in jail, and they're the losers.
Are they? And I think there's a lot of. Sorry, I know you need to go. I know you
but
need to go.
But my point. I mean, when
what's your
a
point?
lot of people when people think of wrongdoers, a lot of times what they think of are people who we would consider like true criminals. I know in a lot of our minds, yours and mine, there's like a Venn diagram, a major overlap between the circle of the winners and the circle of the wrongdoers. Those circles, are practically on top of each other. But the point's kind of the same either way. Like, to forgive a murderer, have compassion for the quote unquote winner, it's ultimately the same gesture of the heart, isn't it?
It is. Okay. And that's a good place to end. Robert, thank you so much. I know you have to run. You have another meeting, but I've loved this 2-part series. And I hope that those of you who are listening have enjoyed it as well. And we look forward to seeing you in our next episode of Exploring A Course in Miracles. If you want to attend these live, we record every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern. You can register for the free link at circleofa.org/events. See you next time. Bye for now.